Hello, ngHouston. I am very excited about today's episode because we're going to be having some really cool stuff on today. We have AG Grid in the house, and I don't know if you guys have used AG Grid before, but I have. It's beautiful, and I'm very excited to have these guys on the show. So I would like to introduce Niall and Sean. You guys say hello.
Hello, guys. Hello, ngHouston.
Hello.
My name's Niall.
My name's Sean.
Welcome. I'm so happy to have you guys on the show. Thank you so much for making time for us. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Delighted to be here.
And so we're going to have a little bit of a live code demo. But first, before we jump into that, I kind of want to talk a little bit about, just for anyone who hasn't heard of it. I think at this point, I would say everybody's heard of AG Grid, but I can't say that because there's a lot of beginners that watch this show. So let's just spend a few minutes real quick before we jump into the code. I would like to hear, Niall, can you tell us kind of like how AG Grid started? Did you mean to do this? Was it an accident?
Yeah, it kind of was an accident. Where we are today was definitely an accident. I didn't see my pet project from back then progressing into where AG Grid is today. But if we go back 5 years, like when did I write that first line of code? I was working. I had a job like everybody else. I was working for one of the banks in London, and banks have data grids in most of their applications. And every year we'd start a new application and we'd try and work out what data grid are we going to use. And we'd look at what was there. And the data grids had a bit of a problem where they'd be good at some things, but not good at other things. So you'd have one grid to do grouping well, but wouldn't pin columns. And then you get another grid that would group well or would pin columns, but the performance wouldn't be the best. So every time you had an application, you made a compromise and you picked the grid that was the best grid for that application, but you knew you were kind of, if feature creep was to come in and the customer was to ask, oh, we need to do pinning now, then you go, oh, crap, the grid I chose doesn't do pinning very well. So what I found really was there wasn't one grid that would just be, solid, that would actually work across all those, say, 10 or 15 core features that you'd need in the data grid. And to be honest, that left me frustrated. I was angry. And that anger over Christmas, which was the Christmas just at the end of 2014, got me to take out my keyboard, my laptop, and just try and see, how hard can it be? Can I actually write a data grid which will be able to do all of these features and be usable?
Famous
yeah.
I think the most frustrating thing is once you start using a data grid, you don't really find out that it's not going to meet your needs until after you've invested like 3 sprints already. It's all set up. You've written all this code, and now you find out it's not exactly.
And so, usually it's too late. Usually, as you say, you have invested. So, you need to do this extra feature. You have to make it work, and you're pulling your hair out trying to get this in. But yeah, it was. When I first did it, I only decided to release it as open source afterwards. It was like at the end of 2 weeks, I went, hold on a sec, that this is actually pretty cool. So I put it onto GitHub, I did a bit of a website, and I pushed it out. And then people contacted me on GitHub, and I was using it in my work. They were good to let me use my open source project. But people started telling me, hold on, what you've done is actually pretty cool. I'm using it in my project. And it was only then I realized, hold on, my problems, there are other people's problems as well. And that's where the community then started forming around AG Grid.
Was there a lot of pressure for you? Like all of a sudden now you have another job.
Yes. You know what? Some things happened which I should have seen come, and I didn't expect them. One was features I didn't care about, other people cared about. Like, for example, pagination is a feature a lot of people use, but I didn't. I didn't have passion for pagination. But because it was now going to be this open source grid that was going to be the grid to solve everybody's problems, I had to put all these features in. So it went from what I needed to, well, what the world needed, and all these requirements came in. But that was brilliant because, requirements is what helped you build a better product. And it took us about, I'd say, well, at the start it was just me, and then the team built up over a while. But I'd say it took us about 18 months to get all those base requirements in before we could say, yeah, we've got a fully featured grid.
I love it. And there used to be many grids, and it's kind of like, I feel like they've kind of started dropping away, and now you have risen to the top. And I know, and I don't know, like I said, there's a lot of beginners that watch ngHouston, right? But for anyone who's not a beginner, if you've ever had an Angular project scale, especially while you were learning Angular, don't ask me how I know this, what you might find is if you're not careful and if you don't know what you're doing, that as your project scales, you start to have performance problems, especially especially in a large table, because you might have 500 rows, you might end up with 5,000 rows, right? And if you've got like an ngFor inside of another ngFor and maybe an ngFor inside of that, or you've got like all these structural directives nested, it starts to have performance problems. And especially in a data grid, like that can be really serious. So I really would like to know how, like, because the beauty, and this is, again, I think maybe experience talking, because I know how hard it is to have all this robust functionality and performance, because it's so easy to just slow it down. So how did you manage to, like, I'm assuming that you were learning kind of along the way, like all of us were, because Angular is still kind of new, not new anymore, but in the grand scheme of things, it's new, right? So did you have any issues with performance? Or did you just woke up like this and you were just this cool automatically?
No, we had lots of issues, and you mentioned there as well getting all the features to work together. And I think those are the two most difficult things with the grid, is getting all the features to work together and the performance. So normally, if you're writing an application and you need to add another module, it doesn't depend on all the other modules. So you have to write a new page for, say, user admin rights. That page exists by itself. But if you're adding something to a grid, like you're adding the pivot feature, then I had to make sure that that worked with the filtering, with the sorting, with the grouping, with the column moving, with everything else. And the more features you add, the more interdependencies that you have, and it really becomes a bit of a nightmare. And that's where I've seen other grids struggle, where they'll start off well, they'll do a really good filtering operation, but then as they start to add the layers in and add the features in, then yeah, it gets really, really, really tricky. So yeah, we just, I guess for the to get it working well, we've got a very, very good solid code base, but we're constantly improving, constantly refactoring. We've rewritten the engine maybe 3 or 4 times at this stage. And you know, we own up to failures. We say, yeah, look, we did that wrong. We see a better way of doing it, and then we take the time to try and do it more correctly. With the performance, that was iterative. Kind of every 6 months was like, we've got to make this faster. We've got to make this faster. And what kept pushing us is a lot of banks use AG Grid. A lot of those banks are on Internet Explorer.
Oh.
That's slow. And they're on slow machines or even virtual machines. You'll have business people who are logging in remotely in VMs. And, you know, we're okay on our XPS laptops or our latest Mac laptops on Chrome, and it all works really, really, really fast. But that's not good enough. We have to make sure it works really fast on IE on a virtual machine. And when you get that working fast, then it's just like blazing fast inside of Chrome. But yeah, if I was to go into the details and the tricks of like how we made it go faster, that's like a whole new episode.
Oh yeah.
But
well, I have to tell you, I know, I didn't really know you. I just talked to you a little bit at Angular Connect, but I know I was very impressed when you hired. And don't tell Max I said this, because we don't.
Between us, us three only.
I've been watching his blog for a long time, and like, if you really want to take the Angular DOM manipulation to the next level and do like some really impressive, beautiful, advanced stuff, like Max is the guy who was, I mean, I felt like I was pretty good at Angular, and I learned some stuff from him that just blew my mind, right? So when you hired him, I was like, man, these guys are not kidding around at all.
Yeah.
And you had some more hires that I was, because some of these guys have been writing technical articles for a while, so we know they're good. And then you're just quietly going around and hiring some of like the best people in the Angular community. So that's when I was like, man, this guy's not messing around at all.
Absolutely.
It's gonna go.
It's a bit like the movies where you try to build your A team and you get to pick the different people. And when you approach somebody and you say, would you like to work for AG Grid? They actually think, yeah, that's a good prospect. Whereas, you know, 5 years ago, nobody ever heard of us. But now, yeah, we kind of have that kind of attraction that the people see this as a great place to work. And
well, there was another guy that I met that was on.
Did he have big muscles?
The big guy that I can't.
He looked like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. It wasn't Dwayne Johnson, but he looks like him. That's Gil. We approached Gil he used to work for Sencha, which is used to be a big player in this world. He was their lead grid developer, and he's come on board. He joined us. He was living in Brazil. Yeah. And he moved over to London to work for us.
Tell him I said hello. I met him in London. I really liked him, and I think he's really great. Okay, so anything else that you want to tell us about the history of AG Grid or the team before because I want Sean to like show us some code. You know, ngHouston, like we got to see it. We want to see it. We don't want chit chat.
I tell you what, we'll just fast forward. So today, to let everybody know, we've got 18 people in the company. We're based out of London. That's 18 people full-time in our London office, which is, crazy. It's blown me away. And our community version of AG Grid has about 500,000 downloads a month. So it's, we've taken over. But yeah, that's the last bit of the story.
I'm really impressed with your team. I'm really impressed. Really, Niall, I'm really impressed with how fast AG Grid is, because I know that something I know how easy it is to slow down. Once you get all that stuff in the page, there's a lot of moving parts there. And the fact that it does so many things and it's clean and it's fast is really, my hat is off to you.
Yeah, thank you. We're really proud of it. When we see it working, it's like, I kind of impressed myself looking at it going, oh my God, all this work, and to see it all working together. And when I look at it, I'm thinking of all the different algorithms and designs and conversations that got into that part. And yeah, it's I agree. Thank you for the compliment. And yeah, it's impressive. We're impressed.
When I think a lot of people, the quality of workmanship in the olden days was higher. And I see so much that people don't take pride in their work as much as they used to. And I think really that's what, I love it when I see someone who actually really cares a lot about the quality and they demand that high quality. It brings joy to my heart, and it gives me faith in humanity again. So thank you for that. And but don't let it go to your head, Niall. Let's
I push the camera further away so my head doesn't get visibly bigger.
I know, right? We gotta stop all these compliments and let's go. Hey, Sean, can you teach us some cool stuff? And so I think Niall said you were going to start with like a super simple CLI project and just like hello world, and then maybe make
show you. So let me know if you can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
All right. So this is not a super simple one. I wanted to start off on an intermediate type grid. Okay. So we've got not a huge amount of data, not a huge amount of columns. But we have some intermediate level functionality. We've got some grouping. We've got the tool panel on the right. We can look at some pivoting. This is not Angular specific so much. This is just grid specific, just giving you a high level, starting out without any Angular components at this stage. So we can go into pivot mode, which is hugely powerful. So that was very quick, very high level. But I'm just demonstrating that out of the box with no Angular specific components within the grid, you get a huge amount of functionality, because all we've done here really is given the grid column definitions, the grouping, the name, skills, that sort of thing, and then the array of row data. But out of the box, you get a huge amount of stuff without having to do much. You can add sorting, all that sort of good stuff. All right. So this is not the simplest grid in the world, simplest definition in the world. But it's not super complex either. It's an intermediary level grid, and I'll show you what we have so far, and then we can expand with some Angular components that you as a developer would provide to the grid to make it a little bit more interesting, or a little bit more bespoke and powerful, I'd say. So if we go here, this is the template for the grid. Can you see that okay, Bonnie? Bonnie, can you see my screen?
Yes, sorry, I had to go find the unmute button. Yes, I can see it. Can you
Okay.
a little bit bigger, Sean?
Okay, yep, give me a second. My bad, I should have gone into increase. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. A lot of people watch this on mobile, so it's a little bit hard. I should have mentioned about that before.
Let me go to presentation mode. Maybe that'll be better. Is that better?
Oh yeah, that's much better.
All right. Okay, so this is just looking at and this is just for demo purposes, right? I mean, you probably have some more rich stuff going on here, but we've specified the Angular, the AG Grid Angular components. We've got a height and width. We've got a theme. We ship with a whole bunch of themes out the box: material design theme, our own Balam theme. We've specified the column definitions and the row data here, which I will look at the actual components in a second. We've said we want the sidebar to be true. We want the sidebar to show. You can also use shorthand, where you can just set a property without having to specify true. It'll default to true if it's a Boolean property. And we specified some other properties here. And finally, we're registering on an event. So when the grid's instantiated, we can hook into that, grab the grid API, and auto size the columns and that sort of thing. So we're going to look at the actual component now. So this is all Angular-y type stuff. This should be familiar to most of you guys and girls. So we've got a whole bunch of properties here. A lot of this component that I've got here, and I can make it available on GitHub if you'd like, is just creating test data. So I'm only going to show you stuff that's, I think, is interesting for this demo purpose. So as I said before, what you'll commonly want to do is hook into the grid ready event. So when the grid ready event fires, the grid's instantiated, we rendered the rows, and you can grab the grid API and the column API to do more powerful stuff later on. And we auto size the columns, so we span the columns out along the width to make them look nice and fit, not have any extra white space on either sides. The other thing you'll want to do is specify the column definitions. Now, there's a lot going on in these column definitions. Like I said, this isn't the very simplest column definition in the world. Honestly, the simplest column definition you can have is that. You specify the field. So you'll pass into the grid an array of JSON data. And the bare minimum you need to do is specify the field that you want to pull out per row of the array, right? So the very bare minimum is specify the field. We'll capitalize the property and display it. So you don't have to go as advanced as I've gone here.
Hey, Sean, can I stop you for a second?
Yep.
You're going fast, but it's okay. Just a bit, because one of the things I just have to say to Niall is I love the fact that you guys have lifecycle hooks in here, that we could just hook into a hook with what was that on grid ready?
Yep.
I love that. I love the fact that you guys included that. And as far as the column depths are concerned, you have so many optional parameters, but they're all optional, right? So you don't have to use any of that stuff because it's all defaulted, which I love, which I think that's beautiful. So I don't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to comment.
No, that's fair. I mean, we'll just do a slight segue. A big part of the philosophy of the grid is that the grid gives you a huge amount of functionality out the box, but it doesn't insist you use it all. And we also very event and callback based. So you can listen to all the events and you can hook into all the callbacks to do cool but bespoke and powerful things. And that's how we open up the grid to you with events and callbacks and properties. But as you say, you don't have to use those. At the bare minimum, like I said, of the column definition, you specify the property and away you go. And then you can iteratively grow. You can say, actually, I want to add renderers and I want to enable filtering. You can iteratively add in the components, exactly as you said, Bonnie. You put it well. So we expose that sort of thing. We expose the advanced functionality for you, but we don't insist you use it.
I feel like Niall left us all these gifts because of the pain that he went through at the very beginning of the episode. We were talking about he was like using these grids, and then you come along and you've done all this, and then you find out you have this specific, functionality that you need, and you can't, right? So it's so easy to take everything that you've done with AG Grid and go, okay, it does everything, and now I want to put my own functionality on top of it. And these hooks and all these optional parameters just make it so easy to do that. So we love you guys. I already liked you when this episode started, but the more it goes, it's like, yeah, this is very cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's fine.
I'm so excited about this.
Well, okay, so as you said, there's the column definitions, and that's really the minimum. So these column definitions are a little bit more advanced. So we'll be demonstrating a few things here, but to repeat myself, at the bare minimum, you just need to specify the field. So this is all grid specific. Let's take a look at something Angular specific. So if we go back to this demonstration, we've got a filter which we provide out the box. So let's expand island. And this proficiency in a skill is from 0 to 100%, right? So let's say we want to look at everyone who's got a skill of over 20% in, and Lucy has 20% proficiency. So that's fine, but let's see if we can improve that with something more visually arresting and also introduce an Angular components along the way. So the first thing we'll do is we'll specify our Angular components. So we've got, so the top part of this stuff, this component is all, it should be all familiar to Angular developers. So we've got a normal template here. The indentation is not awesome, so let me just push that back a little bit. But this, everything you see here, and most of what you see in this component, and nearly all of it, in fact, is Angular-y. There's nothing grid specific so far. The template's all Angular specific. I'm going to render, oops, I'm looking at the wrong one, but still, the point stands, and I'll go to the components I'm actually going to show you. 99% of the components will be Angular components. It's not, there's not a huge amount of grid specific knowledge. So I won't go into too much detail here. The one thing that you'll need in a renderer, which is what I'll demonstrate first, is a lifecycle event we ask you to expose, and that way we pass in the cell value and make available the API and column definition as well. So you don't have to talk, the grid doesn't have to pass it in, we'll pass it into you per cell. So that's the only thing that you as a developer will need to implement, would be AG init, a lifecycle event. So we'll instantiate your component and then pass in the cell value and the column API and a few other parameters. This AG init and then optionally refresh are the only really grid specific lifecycle hooks that you need to provide or can provide in the case of refresh, that you have to provide in the case of AG init. Everything else that you do in this Angular components or any of the Angular components are normal Angular events. So 99% of the components you write for the grid will be Angular components. And then the only events only methods you need to provide are lifecycle hooks that enable us to give you or you to hook into events. So in the case of a cell renderer, AG init, and that's the way we give you the state of the cell that it's going to render. So this is a horizontal bar component. So we're going to display, instead of a number in the cell, we want to display something a little bit nicer. We're going to render a little bit of an SVG that'll be as wide as the percentage value. So I won't go into too much of this because it's just a normal Angular component. So we've written our Angular component here. And then in the grid, we pass in to the grid into framework components, the component that we want to use. In this case, we've passed in the horizontal bar component and give it a name. This name on the left can be anything. It could be ASDF. It's just whatever you want to be.
If you get a chance, we had someone who wanted to know where the selector was for the component. Don't forget, we have a couple of
absolutely. So that's a good point. We don't care.
Easy for you because you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, no, it's a force of habit. You don't need to. We don't use the selector for the way we dynamically create the components and the way we dynamically inject them into the grid. So you'll see in this template, I don't even have a selector. It's not necessary. So it's not used at all. So if you supply it, it will be ignored. We don't hook it in that way because these components are rendered dynamically when you instantiate or when you scroll and destroy dynamically. You don't need a selector.
Gotcha.
Okay. And
you're going to show us how you hook it up. Oh, because it's in there. So you've got the horizontal bar component right there on line 37. Absolutely.
At this stage, we've just told the grid, AG grid, that we want to use. Hey, we're going to pass in this Angular component. Be aware of it. But so far, the grid won't do anything. It'll be, yep, okay, got it. Where do you want to use it now? Awesome. So you could, in theory, use the same renderer in a filter and a renderer and an editor. I mean, that's not realistic because they have different purposes, but you could. So here you just, in a usage agnostic way, specify the components you want the grid to know about. Then, using the name you've got, you specify where you want to use it. So in this case, we want to use that renderer as a cell renderer. And so we say we want to use a cell renderer for this value in proficiency, and we pass in the name we specified above. So as I said, that could have been ASDF, that could be my renderer. In this case, I've used horizontal bar components. So the grid will say, take in the components you want to use, store them, register them, and this way, we close the loop by saying, okay, now that grid the components I told you about earlier, I want you to actually use it to render this column cells. That make sense so far?
Yes, it does.
Cool. And that closes the cycle. So if we go back here, and this re-renders.
Wait, sorry. So I know your actual demo is pretty quick, and we might go into a little bit more of this. Some of this stuff is a little bit advanced, and maybe we bring Sean back for because I think some of the stuff that you're running through real quick, Sean, which makes sense to me because I'm an Angular architect, but we do have a lot of people who have not. Okay. So basically what we're doing, if I can jump in here and explain it just a little bit, and you stop me if I'm wrong.
No, go ahead.
What we're doing, because you would have an HTML file with a bunch of tags in it, right? And you could, like Dollar Dream said, normally a lot of the, especially Angular beginners, are used to seeing that selector in the HTML file. So basically what we're doing, y'all, is Sean is taking an Angular component that he's created, and he's basically using it on the fly. And there's a thing called, I think Max wrote a really great article about it. It's a component factory resolver, or like a component factory, where you can actually basically plug your component, your custom component, into the DOM on the fly. So that's basically what he's doing. The cell renderer is the AG grid parameter that takes in the component that you're going to render on the fly. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So that's exactly right. And we do that. So you're right. I'm going several steps probably too far. But each of these things that I'm clicking on now, that's a cell, exactly as you said, Bonnie. And we need to, in the grid, create these and instantiate them and destroy them dynamically, because when we scroll in this particular example, I can't demonstrate it because I don't have that many rows. But let's assume that you had a fairly flat grid with 10,000 or 100,000 rows, and as the user scrolls, we're going to destroy rows and create new rows. And for us to support dynamic renderers or dynamic of any component, we create them, as you say, with the component resolver and that sort of thing, and we instantiate it into the grid and get rid of it in the same way. So it's exactly as you said. So 99% of the time, as you say, you'll use a selector. It's just due to the nature of the grid and how we dynamically instantiate things. It's not needed and not necessary.
And the dynamic, the way that this is done, and I really feel like I'm stressing this too much, but for me, it's such a big deal, because if you do Angular wrong, and yes, it is possible to implement Angular incorrectly. Don't ask me how I know that. But if you do Angular wrong, really the biggest thing that we find, at least the biggest thing that I've found as I have more and more experience with Angular, is it's going to work, but it's going to be really laggy and slow. And if you ever have laggy and slow Angular, I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say it's your fault, because Angular is not slow. Angular is wicked fast. And the fact that AG Grid has all this functionality and it's so fast is, I think, the most beautiful part.
Thank you. That's true. So I think frameworks allow you to do a lot of cool stuff, but they also allow you, if you do it wrong, to tie yourself up.
Yeah.
So we, over time, as Niall said, we've iteratively improved things, and as the grid gets faster, we'll work even better with frameworks and Angular, for example. So to get that performance and to make it super slick with a huge amount of rows, which I'm not demonstrating here, but to make it super slick, we have to be dynamic and dynamically create and not statically do so. So yeah, closing the loop, exactly as you said, Bonnie.
So there's two reasons for this. For the beginners that are watching, because we do have a lot of beginners, and I love my beginners, and I really don't want to leave them behind. So this is more complicated, right? It's a little bit more difficult to figure out sorry, my Slack's going on. When you're trying to do something like this, where everything is rendered dynamically, it's harder. I mean, legit, it's more advanced code, but there are two reasons for this. Number one, because it's more flexible, because if AG Grid is rendering something on the fly and you want to put another HTML tag in there, you can't, right? Because it's rendered dynamically, you can't use an HTML tag. And also, if you were doing all of this in the HTML, it would be extremely slow. So when you start really getting more demanding and more advanced with your Angular, you really need to be able to throw up and pull down these custom components on the fly, which can be a little tricky, but that's what you guys have done beautifully.
That's right, and that's true. But I also just want to stress that that complexity isn't exposed to the user. Right. All of what you've said is true, and it's a super important part of the performance and the flexibility we provide. But none of that is necessary or exposed to the user. An Angular developer will write Angular components and shouldn't need to know and be exposed to the dynamic nature underneath. It'll all just work out the box. So everything you've said is absolutely accurate, but that complexity isn't, although maybe I've used a bit of a complex example here, isn't necessary for a developer. Your Angular component will work in the grid in the same way it would in any Angular components. But you're right, behind the scenes, there's a lot of cool stuff going on, but it shouldn't be necessary for a developer to know that. It is interesting, I think, to know, but it isn't necessary to know.
Okay, I want to just throw out one more comment for my beginners, and then I'm going to go back on mute and let you, because I know you've got some more code, because I don't want want to throw you off this because this is really cool, but I just want to say one more thing. If you are a beginner with Angular, and I know there are a lot of them, and welcome, we love you. If you are a beginner with Angular and you want to use AG Grid, don't be intimidated by this, because I want you to go to the AG Grid documentation. It's very beautiful. It's very simple. If you're trying to do something and you don't, and you just haven't gone really that far advanced with Angular, that's totally okay, because again, like Sean said, you don't have to use all this fancy functionality. You can just go and make a simple data grid. And as you get stuck, when you start doing more and more challenging things, as you become a power user and you start getting more demanding with what you need, you can go to the AG Grid documentation and you'll find, and it's really beautiful. So if you don't know what Sean's talking about with that stuff, don't worry about it, because you really got to go check out that documentation. It's beautiful. And I'm going to go back on mute now, Sean, so I'm going to stop interrupting you.
Okay. You know what? I think with that in mind, I'm going to take that little example I've got and make it even simpler, Bonnie. So from the grid side of things, that's still true. You write your components, you pass it into the grid in frameworks components, and then you specify it where you want to use it. So in this case, we close the loop by saying, I want to use this component in the cell renderer. Grid-wise, configuration-wise, that's the extent of what you need to do. If we now look at the horizontal component, let's make this even simpler. Let's remove all this SVG stuff, because maybe I'm losing the wood for the trees here. So I'm going to say at the very minimum, you can have that. And the percentage net change is just the value we pass in. So when we instantiate the cell, we pass in the value. You can pull out the value, and that value in this case will be a percentage from 0 to 100. So in the templates, it can be as simple as taking out that value and rendering it. So if we go look at the grid now, and this renders, it's just a percentage, right? Same as what we had before. So we can extend that renderer just a little bit. Let's put some dashes on either side of it, just to show that it actually has changed. And now we've got the value. So you can take this further to the example I had where I'm using SVG, but just to reinforce what Bonnie was saying, maybe I'll turn to an advanced renderer there. From an Angular side of things, it's as simple or as rich as you want it to be. So in this case, I've simply taken the value and added a dash on both sides of the value. And that's as complex as it needs to be. So if we take out all this stuff, that's what you would need, just this top side of things. Then we can take it further and add in cooler functionality and cooler features like SVG in this case, and then go back here and render that. But as you said, Bonnie, this can be as simple as complicated as you want it to be. So that's a renderer. That's the simplest type of components you can create, and that's because it's fairly passive. What is passive? We just render a value. We can take this one little step further, and we're going to update and make this filter, this floating filter here, a little bit more friendly. So it works fine out the box. We want to show everyone with proficiency of greater than 50%, and there we go, we filtered that. But let's make this something a little bit more visually arresting. So in this case, I won't go too much detail in the actual component, but this is slightly more complicated component in that we as the grid require a few more things from you as a developer. We pass in the AG and init again. Well, you need you to specify that. We'll pass in the values and so on. And then you need to implement another method called onParent model change. And that's if the grid changes underneath, we'll tell your filter about it. So we don't need to worry about that too much. But in this case, we want to change the filter to just be an input with a slider, to be something a little bit more visually arresting. So again, 99% of this code is normal Angular code. We've got an input, we bind in, we specify in the model, we're listening for model change so that we can let the grid know about it. So there's quite a bit of stuff going on in this template, but that's all Angular type stuff. It's nothing grid specific, and it may look complicated. We're actually just saying this input has it's a slider, we specify our range. We're having a minimum and a maximum, and when the value changes, call back to an event, which in turn tells the grid, hey, this is the state of the filter now. So again, I'll make this available on GitHub, but it's not. It may look a little complicated, but it isn't really in that. Most of this is just Angular, normal Angular code. So if we go back to the grid.
And we have a question when you're ready, Sean.
I beg your pardon?
We have a question when you get
okay. So one more second here. So we specify tell the grid again about the components, and we make it available to the grid in the same way we did with the renderer. In this case, we're just saying, hey, use that renderer we specified, the component we specified before. We want to use it in the floating filter. In the same way we did with the render, just a different part of the grid. So you'll see at the top of the renderer, we don't longer have an input box. We've now got a slider. And the grid-specific code that you needed to know there was 2 method hooks. Just to when we pass you the initial states of the filter, and B, when something changes, you tell the grid about it. So, hey, we're now at roughly 50%. This is the state of the filter. Please apply it. So the amount of grid-specific code you have to do in this case is very little. And again, I've probably made it sound maybe a little bit advanced, but as Bonnie says, if you look at the documentation, it really is very simple. And the documentation, the examples we have on our docs start off with very simple filters and go up to something a little bit more advanced. And even this filter may look advanced. It really, 99% of this is normal HTML5, normal Angular stuff with 1 or 2 methods that are grid specific. But Bonnie, I'm happy for the question now if you want.
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's a pretty good question, and maybe you can actually show it to us real quick. Connie wanted to know, is the dynamic component responsible for CSS styling? I think I know the answer. Obviously, you could put the styling in your custom component if you want to, but I also believe that the optional parameters for AG Grid have a lot of style-related parameters. So I think, Sean, would it be okay? Can you just like give us a background color on one of those cells just to show us a little bit of CSS, just real quick?
Okay, so these 2 things there really. One is grid styling, and you can specify styling either in CSS classes or inline styles, and you can do that outside of an Angular context. So for example, if I wanted to change name to have a different style, I can do so by let's use name. Is it row style? Is that the cell style?
Cell style. Yeah.
And that's just
ask Niall.
Yeah.
Too many properties. You don't remember them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you asked earlier about our background.
It's an object.
And my main focus at the at AG Grid is framework support. So keeping up to speed on the Angular and all the other frameworks and keeping us ahead. So for example, Ivy support that's coming up. That's my main role. So I tend to forget about how many features there are and how powerful it is.
And also, it's much harder when you're live streaming. It's much harder. I can't even spell JavaScript when I'm sharing my screen on YouTube.
So so what I'm doing now is applying a style inline, right? And this is not Angular specific. This is just saying to the grid, I want to style this component, or the cell rather, with this style. And I said in this case, we've set a background color of red. And we've taken that a little bit further by applying something called the cell class rule, which is pretty cool and super easy and super powerful. Well, we won't show that for now.
No, I'm going to put it into proficiency.
Okay.
Because it's actually got a value.
But there's a renderer there as well, remember?
God damn it. I'm on a Mac, and I normally am a Windows person, and I'm trying to just do cut, copy, paste. How do I cut this? Control X?
Yes.
There we go. And then Control V.
Houston, you're so busted.
So he's not only live coding, he's live coding on a Mac. So
which for me is a big deal.
You're doing such a good job, Sean.
But there's a renderer there, which I think will take precedence from.
How do I right click on the Mac?
Yeah, so I'll do it for you.
Here, inspect that. I don't have the classes set up, but if we inspect this cell, do you want to inspect that cell, Sean?
Yep. This is what happens when we live code.
Yeah. So to answer Connie's question, yes, you absolutely can style the CSS. So you could do it through the parameters, or you could style it in your component, whatever you want.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Or I'll just say what I was trying to do, if I go back to the code, maybe without it been listening, to tell people. So these cell class rules, I apply a rule here. And this is saying if the value is greater than 50, it's going to add the CSS class A to that cell. So it's a way of dynamically adding cells or adding classes to the cells based on the values. So, if you're in a financial application, you might have the value red if it's negative or black if it's positive, that type of thing.
So what that enables you to do, Bonnie, which is create styles and if-else statements, conditional statements for styling in the cells and or rows without needing to create Angular components. So Angular components are super fast, super powerful, and they're great. But if you don't need to instantiate and destroy components, it'll be even faster. So that's one side of things, right? We enable you we give you the tools to style cells or rows dynamically or statically up front. The second part of that question is how can you apply CSS to the components you provide? Well, that's normal Angular. You can have scope styling and all that sort of good stuff in your component, which won't bleed out anywhere else. That'll just work out the box.
Right.
So you can style your components as you would anywhere else without having that exposed. And then you can separately and or additionally style rows and cells with just CSS and no Angular specific parts to it.
So what I hear you saying is, in answer to Connie's question, yes, you can style your own dynamic component, but that's actually not the easiest way. If you already have your own dynamic component that you're passing in, then go ahead and CSS it. But you don't need to do it just for that, because if you just want CSS, just go ahead and put it in the parameters, and it's super easy because you guys are passing in an object, and then within that, what is it called? CSS style. Within that object, you're just writing regular old CSS.
Absolutely, and you can actually reference a style sheet as well. So you don't have to inline style. You can just say in your main style sheet, for example, some class and reference it. So you've got web methods, but it's exactly as you said, Bonnie. Unless you're rendering something different to the raw value, you don't need an Angular component. If you want to take it further and render like a little line like I've done here, then you can apply normal Angular CSS style rules and scoping and that sort of thing. So if you're happy with the raw value, normal CSS, you can use normal CSS without you needing to create dynamic components. But if you're already using a dynamic Angular component, then the normal Angular CSS styling rules apply.
This is lovely. Okay, we are starting to run out of time, and I just want to wrap this up real quick. Can you guys turn off your screen share and come back so we can see you again? I know everybody, so ngHouston is supposed to be like an hour. I know everybody has to go back to work, but I would really like to know real quick, what are you guys doing next? And also, I mean, I have to thank you both for coming on, because this is very cool. And I think anyone who really knows Angular would know, especially those of us who have been around for a while, AG Grid is super solid. And we really appreciate you guys. But and also, Niall, how the hell is this free? I don't even understand.
Well, there's two versions. We have a free community version, and then we have an enterprise version as well. So the enterprise version has some more advanced features, and that's what pays our salaries. So yeah, the free one's MIT. Use it for free. You don't need to even let us know. And then the enterprise, that's where we make our money from.
I really appreciate it. It's like I
You're welcome.
love AG Grid. Okay, so what about now? What are y'all doing? You have more features. What are you doing next?
Yeah, we're going to be a bit brave. That there's this saying that I like, which is if your dreams don't scare you, you're not dreaming big enough. And I think that's brilliant.
Scare me.
So the grid's been brilliant, and we're going to continue pushing the grid. We're going to continue go and making it better and better and better. We're not finished. We're going to keep doing that, but we're getting hungry to do something even bigger. And we had a little conference, an AG Grid conference in London at the end of last year, and we asked our users, a room of maybe 200 people, what do you want to see AG Grid do? And the number one thing that they came back to us with was charting. And I asked, charting, but there's loads of good charting libraries out there. What would we do that's different? And then they told me, we want a charting library that's integrated with a grid. So you load up AG Grid, you've got all of your data, and then wouldn't it be cool to just right-click and say, go to chart, and do that without the developer having to write any charting code?
Yes.
I went, you know what? Hell yeah. And I never thought about it like that before. That's the differentiator. So all these people are using AG Grid. Let's integrate charting into the grid and just expose that out. So we've been working really, really hard on that ever since. So for the last 5 months, we've been working on our charting engine inside AG Grid, and we're just about to release. We're doing our final edge cases. We're hoping to release at the end of next week. So would you like us to give you a little demo of what we have in the labs?
Yes. Take my money? I want it now.
Oh, next week, Bonnie.
Okay. So I've just got to start up that local.
I thought you were going to show me a demo now, and I was getting really excited.
Well, we
Oh,
can.
no. Yeah, we just need to start another app.
Just give us a second. We'll spin it up for you, Bonnie.
Can you really?
Yeah.
Just show me. I won't tell anybody. I just want to see just a little.
Our little secret. And then we've actually been quite lucky with the team, and we got a really expert charting guy to come join us. He was one of the lead chart developers at Sencha, who did EXTJS. His name's Vitaly, the Russian guy, and just like Gil, he's moved to London as well and is now working with us, and he's been brilliant part of the team. So yeah, we're actually, I'm not just saying this trying to build up energy, but we are seriously really excited about this being released, because we see this as a game changer. There's no other grid that actually integrates the charting with the grid. That if you can get a charting library and you can get a grid, and then you have to write code to make them work together, but to have it work out of the box, no one has done that yet. So now you should see on our.
I'm just going to present the screen. Present this, Bonnie.
Oh, we're going back and I was on camera. I didn't realize.
No, but we were talking. So.
Okay.
So, we'll do a quick little demo here for you, Bonnie. You want me to drive?
Yes, you go for it.
So you can talk and say what I'm doing, and then we'll go from there.
You want me to talk?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to select some? Well, this is our main demo page. Sean's just going to select some figures, and he's going to right-click on the context menu, and you see here chart range. So basically, if you're using AG Grid, all you need to do is set one property, enable charts to true, and then all of this functionality is exposed inside the grid without you having to write any more code. So
I'm so excited. I'm like, click on it, Sean. I want to.
All right, there we go. Okay, so that's the chart in the pop-up. It's going to have there's an API, so it can be in a pop-up, or you can have it in another part of your app to create kind of a dashboard. We want the kind of Excel type experience. So Sean's going to drag the range in the background. What you can do is maybe if you close that chart and do another one, but just do figures on the right-hand side. Yeah. Okay, that's enough. And then you might scroll over a small bit.
Okay. Excuse me a second, Bonnie. We're live demoing you.
Yeah.
No, I love this. I'm so excited about this. This is very cool.
Grouped?
Yep, that's fine. Okay, so now you'll be able to grab the corner here of the range. Okay. Yeah. And then as he moves this range in the background, you can see the chart is dynamically updating as the range changes.
Fast. Hold on, I gotta stop taking your screen there. So that's, oh my goodness, that's beautiful. And this is like without any extra code, it's just functionality out of the box.
Right, exactly. So
don't
here on
science, Niall.
So here we're sorting the data, and you can see that the chart updates. It stays with the same range that we've selected. So as you sort, the numbers that you're looking at change. We've also got lots of different chart types. So if I go in here, we can check there's the normal bar, there's the stacked bar, there's our line, there's our pie, there's our donut. We've different palettes, so you can pick the palette that you want for the colors.
Oh my goodness.
We've got like fine tuning here where, let me just move the chart down a bit so we can see the data in the background. So we can choose the labels. So I can use country or language or game name, and the highlight changes in the background, or I can fine tune which columns I'm looking at here. We can also
freaking out right now, Niall. I can't even believe that. Like all the whole rest of the episode, I was just like, oh, that's boring compared to this. Like, this is amazing. I cannot believe that you just highlight it right there. But that's in your browser, like right in. Oh my goodness, I can't even get over. Like I can't even handle this.
And then it's an image. So if I could right click on a Mac, because I can't, Sean, right click there. Okay, there's copy image. So basically what your users are going to be able to do is like what they do in Excel. They'll see their data, they'll create a chart, they'll right click, and then they'll put it into an email or their document or include it in their PowerPoint. And that's like just going to be so awesome.
You're my hero.
Thank you.
All right, we got to wrap this up. Is there anything else that you can't follow that. I would not.
Is there anything else? Is that not good enough?
There's nothing that could possibly be as cool as what you just showed. You can't even top that.
And this is just version 1 of our charts, and
Okay.
we're in top gear. And over the next 6 months or 12 months, this is just going to get bananas. This is going to be absolutely fantastic.
All right, turn off your screen share again, will you? And I really, Niall, I thought you were cool at the beginning of this hour, but I had no idea like that. I'm speechless, y'all. That's it. That's our mic drop right there.
Thank you.
Connie wants to know if you can send it straight to the printer. We want more features. No, we're just going to end on that, Connie, because like I can't even continue. I don't even have words anymore. That's just, I love you guys. This was such a cool show. You guys are so
Bonnie.
And hey, as soon as it's ready, I really want to start using it. And anytime, Niall, anytime you want to come back on ngHouston and show us some stuff, you really need to do that, because you are welcome anytime, and you're my hero, and I'm going to name my future children after you.
So kind. Thank you very much, Bonnie. And it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us on. And hopefully we'll come on again very, very soon.
This was so great. Okay, yeah, definitely come back soon and often. Thank you so much for AG Grid. Thank you for making it open source and free. And thank you for the charts, because I'm so excited about it. I can't even deal with that right now. And when can we start using that? It's
end of next week is the plan.
Like next week is beta, or next week is like for production ready?
Oh, it's going to be in the next. It's going to be in the next AG Grid release.
This is so great. Okay, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and you're welcome back anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you to all the listeners online as well. It's great to meet you all. Good luck.
Okay, stay on for a second. Bye, guys.
Bye.